Russia has been making the same mistake for 4 years. It underestimates Ukraine. It underestimated Ukraine when it predicted Kiev would fall in 72 hours. It underestimated Ukraine when it assumed Western support would collapse within months. It underestimated Ukraine when it believed its drone superiority was permanent and unchallengeable. And on the night of May 20th, 2026, Russia made its latest and most costly version of that same mistake. It believed a training facility in occupied Ukrainian territory, in the city of Snizhne, 60 miles behind the front line, was safe. In 11 strikes using 100-kilogram warheads, Ukraine's unmanned systems forces proved that it was not. 65 Russian drone pilot cadets died in those 11 strikes. Their commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Bury, a PhD from the Russian Academy of Missile and Artillery Sciences, died alongside them. The 2,484 square meter complex that housed their training program, their drone assembly operations, their warhead production line, and their sleeping quarters was reduced to rubble before the night was over. And the next morning, when Ukraine's commander of unmanned systems forces, Major Robert Brovdy, announced the operation publicly, he said something that cuts to the heart of where this war stands in May 2026. Russia still has not learned. Those words contain a specific meaning that gets lost in the immediate tactical significance of 65 dead. They are not just a statement about this operation. They are a diagnosis, an assessment of Russia's strategic behavior across the entire course of this war, and a warning about what that refusal to learn is going to cost Moscow in the months ahead. To understand what Russia refuses to learn, you have to understand the pattern of miscalculation that has defined Russian strategic thinking since February 24, 2022. Russia assumed Ukraine's military would collapse under the initial shock of the invasion. Ukraine's military did not collapse. Russia assumed that cutting Ukraine off from Western weapons supplies was achievable through diplomatic pressure on NATO members. Western weapons supplies continued. Russia assumed that destroying Ukraine's energy infrastructure would break civilian morale and force Kyiv to negotiate on Russian terms. Ukrainian civilian morale did not break. Russia assumed that its drone superiority, built on Iranian-designed Shahed drones supplied by Tehran, was an asymmetric advantage that Ukraine could not effectively counter. Ukraine countered it, intercepting nearly 90% of incoming Russian drones by March 2026, developing its own interceptor drone technology, deploying that technology to Gulf states. And then, in the operational move Russia least expected, turning drone warfare back on the infrastructure that trains Russia's drone pilots. This is what Russia refuses to learn. Every asymmetric advantage Russia believed it possessed has been studied, countered, adapted to, and eventually turned back against Russia by a Ukrainian military that has been learning faster than its opponent at every stage of this conflict. Russia built drone pilot training facilities in occupied Ukrainian territory. It connected them to the Russian Academy of Missile and Artillery Sciences. It assigned its Akhmat Special Forces units to the program. It invested in production infrastructure, command posts, assembly lines. It created a system for churning out the next generation of operators for its 8,000 per month drone campaign. And it placed all of that infrastructure in territory it believed was safe from Ukrainian reach. Ukraine watched. Ukraine planned. Ukraine executed 11 coordinated strikes in a single night. And now Russia has 2 drone academies in occupied Donetsk instead of 3. The specific unit targeted matters here and deserves attention that it has not received in most coverage of this operation. The Sever Akhmat 78th Special Purpose Motorized Regiment, the unit whose cadets were killed in Snizhne, is not an ordinary Russian military formation. It is the northern branch of the Akhmat Special Forces, the Chechen units that have been deployed as a Kremlin political instrument as much as a military one. Their commander, Ramzan Kadyrov, has spent years using the Akhmat forces as his personal brand, a symbol of Chechen loyalty to Putin and of Russian military capability. Killing 65 Akhmat cadets in their own training facility is not just a military strike. It is a direct blow to the political symbolism that Kadyrov has built around his forces. And Ukraine did it publicly, with footage, with names. with an operation title that contains the word Akhmat, ensuring that everyone in Grozny, in Moscow, and in the Kremlin understands exactly who was hit and why. This is information warfare layered on top of kinetic warfare, layered on top of strategic pressure. Ukraine is not just destroying Russia's military capacity, it is dismantling Russia's military mythology. Now consider what this strike looks like against the backdrop of Russia's strategic decision-making in the same week. Putin refused Trump's ceasefire call on May 19th. The Istanbul peace talks collapsed without agreement. Russia's federal budget deficit hit $80 billion in the first 5 months of the year. 1 million Russian military casualties have been recorded, killed and wounded, since February 2022. Russian forces recorded 0 net territorial gains in March 2026, the first time in 2.5 years. In the 4 weeks between mid-April and mid-May, Russia lost a net 45 square miles of Ukrainian territory. And in response to all of this, to the economic deterioration, the battlefield stagnation, the diplomatic isolation, Russia launched 8,000 drones in March. It resumed bombing Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. It tested a nuclear-capable intercontinental ballistic missile and announced it would be deployed by year's end. And it placed cadets in training facilities in occupied territory that it was certain Ukraine could not reach. Zelensky said Russia still refuses to learn. He is correct. And the refusal is not accidental or irrational, it is structural. Russia's political system, under Putin, has been built around the suppression of accurate feedback. The officials who tell Putin what he wants to hear advance. The officials who report failures honestly are sidelined or worse. The military commanders who acknowledge setbacks face consequences. The result is a decision-making apparatus that is systematically insulated from the information it needs to adapt, including the information that its occupied territory training infrastructure is not safe. The 65 cadets in Snizhny died in part because Russia's intelligence apparatus failed to detect that Ukraine had identified their location. That failure happened because the system that should have detected it is the same system that has been failing at every level of this conflict. Too bureaucratic, too hierarchical, too politically constrained to acknowledge what is actually happening on the ground. Ukraine's military has the opposite problem and the opposite track record. It has been learning continuously, adapting continuously, and, critically, sharing what it learns continuously with its soldiers, its commanders, and through operations like the Snizhny strike, with the world. In May 2026, Ukraine's drone forces achieved record battlefield activity. 19,000 Russian personnel struck in the first 19 days of the month alone. Ukraine has developed a deep strike center specifically to plan operations against Russian rear area infrastructure. It has signed 10-year defense export agreements with Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar, positioning its drone warfare expertise as a global product. Its interception rate against Russian drones reached nearly 90% in March, and it can now simultaneously conduct 2 major deep strike operations, in Donetsk and Kherson, in a single overnight operational cycle. This is not the military of a country that is losing. This is the military of a country that has been at war for over 4 years and has used every month of that time to become more capable, more precise, and more dangerous to Russia's rear areas than Russia ever anticipated. Russia still refuses to learn this. It still believes, despite all evidence, that time is on its side. That attrition will break Ukraine before economic deterioration breaks Russia. That the West will tire before Moscow does. That the ceasefire terms it has been demanding, Ukrainian withdrawal from 4 regions, abandonment of Crimea, no NATO membership, will eventually be accepted because Ukraine has no alternative. 65 dead cadets in a training facility Russia believed was safe is Ukraine's answer to that assumption. The answer is no. And the Deep Strike Center has the coordinates of the other 2 academies. Russia still refuses to learn. Ukraine is going to keep teaching.